Today we are working on the 2005 Camry 4-cylinder for a customer who is basically having issues with the shop that has previously worked on the car. The customer is concerned because this particular shop is saying that there's problems with a lot of leaks. They're recommending replacing a lot of components such as rack and pinion, serpentine belt tensioner, valve cover gasket, and basically what we're trying to do is save this customer some money by fixing the obvious problems first and then rechecking the leak at a later time, because basically this is a low mileage vehicle and it's highly unlikely that all of those components have all sprung leaks, you know, with only 60-some thousand miles on the car. So we can clearly see, because it's at the top, that the valve cover is leaking, and it's pretty likely that maybe not all, but at least some of those other leaks. I also noticed fluid on the power steering pump. There's also some that looks like it's splattered onto the axle, but it's likely that some, if not all, of those other items besides the valve cover gasket are just covered in oil from the valve cover gasket. So the other thing that's very wet with oil that's right below the valve cover in the back, the timing chain tensioner gasket is also a particular item that can leak on this engine. So we're going to take care of that as well, because it's very inexpensive and fairly easy to do. So we'll take care of that, and like I said, recheck later. I guess we'll have to update. We'll have to do an update video. All right, so I think we'll get started. So we need to clear a bunch of space, move some things to get to the chain tensioner, and that includes moving the wiring to the alternator. So we're going to disconnect the battery and oops, negative. Sorry guys, negative. All right, take that off, tuck it out of the way. So we are trying to access the timing chain tensioner, which is tucked way back down in there behind this harness. And in order to get the harness out of the way, there's a little tiny bolt that is like impossible to get your hands into. So I'm going to take off this torque mount to give myself some room to remove that little bolt. Might sound a little crazy, but sometimes it just makes life a lot easier to take things off and get them out of the way. So these are 14mm heads on these bolts. The two main bolts that hold the torque mount to the engine. Nope, you get that. So you're probably asking, why are you undoing an engine mount and just unbolting it the way you are without supporting it? And the thing is, this is a torque mount. It doesn't support the weight of the engine. So you can see I undid the two bolts and the engine didn't move. All it does is absorb twisting motion of the engine. It doesn't support the weight. Ah, there we go. Yeah, it's a really tight space. Easy to get stuff hung up in there. Ah, yeah, it was torqued on there pretty good. 1/2-inch breaker bar might be good for this one. All right. So we'll set those aside, and then you can take this, move that ground wire out of the way, move this mount out of the way. I'm just going to keep rolling with it to make life a lot easier in the long run, I think. I mean, this isn't necessary, but I undid that ground wire, and then there's another 14mm here, and then there's 3 more down there. And we'll have this bracket out of the way. Just make sure you keep track of all these bolts. They're all different lengths. Aha. All right, now that we have easy access, I'm gonna go ahead and take my little 10mm ratcheting wrench, or you know, you could use a regular ratchet as well. Just use a 10mm socket, and there you go. There's that pain in the butt little bolt to get out. So now, see, now we can move our harness back, but it'll move back even better if we get it off of this bracket. So you can pull the tab, slide it forward, and then you can move this. Another step is removing the two nuts that hold the valve cover on. Oh, there we go. So the plugs just slide onto those threads there. Just kind of, they're just pressed on, and then you just yank them out. All right, then we can undo this little bolt that will free up the other wiring harness piece that's blocking the tensioner. Same bolt. Whoa, there we go. So now we're at the point where we've unbolted the harness retainer from the front of the engine, and as you can see, when you try to push it out of the way to get to the tensioner, it doesn't really give you enough room because it's pulling on this. All this stuff's in the way. So we're gonna disconnect these things. That's why we disconnected the battery. So we're gonna unplug some stuff. There we go. And oh, this one's already unbolted. And we gotta disconnect this guy. That's a 10mm socket right there. You can slide back the boot if it helps, and squeeze the tab in the front, or depending on how you look at it, side. Okay, we're almost there. So then there's a retainer right here. There we go. And then we got one more for the AC down here. There we go. So you gotta squeeze the tab right there. Ah, now we got the wiring so we can push it out of the way. And then one other thing, now that I'm filthy, because this thing will tend to gouge your arm, and it'll give you more room, so we'll take that bracket with the ground strap off and set that aside. And now that we have our wiring pushed out of the way, we should have enough room to get down in there. Alright, so here is the tricky part. In order to get the tensioner to come out and without getting stuck running into this harness retainer, there's this little bracket down here, if you can see that. There you go, sorry. So, and at the bottom of it, there's a little tab that you pull downward on, and it will release the harness retainer, the plastic. It'll release it from this gold little metal bracket here. That was the tricky part. Just reaching down there, and you just gotta feel your way in there and pull on the tab. It might be tricky, you just gotta feel for it. And you pull down, it unlocks it, and then you push it back. And then that'll give you just enough room to get the tensioner out. Because when the tensioner comes out, it is going to be fully extended, so you need more room. Putting it back in will be a little bit easier because it's compressed. Okay. Ooh, there we go. Bottom one's starting to get loose. Just using my regular combination wrench, 10mm. Alright, so I'm kind of just doing this by feel. Carefully backing off the nut and so I don't drop it. Okay, there's the lower one. Now we gotta do the upper. Feel it release. So it is pushing tension on the timing chain. Aha, there we go. So I got the other nut out and the tensioner pushed its way out.
Yeah, it's almost coming out.
Oh,
there you go. It came out.
Okay. So we got our flattened leaky gasket out of there. And here's the tensioner. What you got to do is you need to compress it to put it back in. So you just push on the little tab because it has a ratcheting action, and compress it, and then it's got a little hook, and then it's going to be ready to go back in. So I'm putting the new gasket on with the convex side sticking out. I believe that's the best way to do it. And just make sure that your bolt holes line up. You can't do it the other way because it won't line up, as you can see. So there you go. And then when you go to put it in, the engine, since the holes are offset to one side, you basically can't put it in wrong. So it's pretty straightforward. There we go. I think. Oh my god. There we go. Getting it to like turn the corner and like get around the harness is difficult. Here we go. It's in now. It's just getting around this harness thing. That's the worst part. Alright, now that it's in, gasket's in position. Let's get these nuts on here before it releases itself and pops out. Okay. Oh boy, this last nut is gonna be fun. Gotta be very careful. Got it. Okay. Now I'm just gonna tighten it down. Alright, that's it, it's tight. So, oh, see there, it snapped back on. It slid right back in place. It's just a matter of releasing that tab right there. That's all it is. Here's the bolt that holds the harness on. Okay, there we go. Pushing that one in is a little tricky. Can't really see where it's going. But it's in. Alright, so now that horrible harness is back in place. So now to fix the rest of the leak, we're going to move on to removing the valve cover, and so we can replace the gasket. There's a little PCV hose right there. All I did was squeeze the clamp and push it back. It's not on there very tight. Then you have another vent hose right there. Use the hose clamp pliers and get this one out of the way. And it looks like it's, there we go. There we are, okay. So that one's not on too tight either. It's pretty easy to remove. And then we've got coils that are in the way. We do already have our battery disconnected, so no worries on the fact that we're messing with electrical stuff. Alright, let's set these 4 bolts aside right there. Then we have this one little bolt that's holding another section of harness, well, the harness that goes to the coils. Alright, then we just gotta squeeze the tabs. Oh, and of course they break. Yeah, watch out. They might break on you. Oh, they all break. That's awesome. Oh, every single one of them. Look at that. Unfortunately, this happens with some of the older Toyota and Lexus vehicles. The plastic gets brittle, and I barely even squeezed it. It's not like I used too much force, but it just came off. So the plugs, when you go to put them back on, they do stick on pretty well. I suppose you could always use zip ties if you felt the need to, but I think they'll be okay as they are. And oh, this is hanging up on something. So we're gonna take out the coils and just keep them in order. Usually a good idea to keep them in the same place. So now there's a whole bunch of 10mm nuts and bolts to take out to get this valve cover gasket off. Oop, don't want to drop them. And we got a couple in the middle. Alright, then we're going to carefully pry the cover off. Be careful not to damage the mating surface. You want your new gasket to leak. Alright, I think we're okay. And then if you're going to have a helper to pull back that harness right there, it's kind of a pain because it wants to get in the way. But there we go, cover's off. And then we'll remove the gasket, which is still stuck to, oh, look at that. You can tell how brittle it is. It just broke. All right, oh yeah, it's definitely brittle. Look at that. That's a good sign that it is very due. Oh man, it's really stuck. All right, so there's still gonna be little bits of rubber and crap on there. Razor blade scraper will help with that. So before we put the new gasket on, we're gonna clean up the mating surface because there's oil, there's dirt. None of that's gonna be good for the seal of the new gasket. As you can see, it's pretty filthy. Don't forget to clean around the spark plug tube seals. Definitely don't want that area to leak and get oil into your spark plugs. Sealing surface cleaned, including spark plug tube seals. And it's time to set up our valve cover with the new gasket. Get some brake clean in there. Ow, that just went and cut my finger. That really hurt. Okay, so we'll make sure that all runs out. Don't want that in the engine. Let that dry for a minute. Brake clean dries really fast. That's the nice thing about it. So we got to put our gasket in place. It's good when it fits a little tight because then that's going to hold it in there so it doesn't fall out of place when we go to set it back onto the engine. Just make sure everything is pressed down into its new home. And I got a little dirty, so I'm just going to run over with acetone right before I put it on. This rag's still wet with acetone. Alright, looks good. So if you're lucky enough to have a helper to pull that harness back, positioning this should be pretty easy. And then one last thing is you need to put a little bit of RTV on the seam where the timing cover meets the head. So you don't want that little seam to be the spot where it leaks. That's the way they did it from the factory, so we're gonna do the same. All right, there we go. Boom, just like that. So now you can start putting all your bolts back in. I'll start with the middle and work my way out. So it's all bolts except for these two nuts, which basically help you align it. Tighten these suckers down. Alright, I'm just going to double check them all. Make sure they're all snug, which I think they are. Oh, a little more on that one. That's why it's good to double check. Alright, sealed. Okay, so time to put everything else back. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops. And we got a little one here. Got this other crap. So is this a no talking? I can just go? Okay. Yeah, I just want to get this done. It's just all putting it back. If they can see it, they can believe it. Alright, now I'm just putting everything back. All the connectors, all the support brackets, plugging everything back in. Make sure and put that little seal, that boot, back over the plug on the alternator. This one on. This one. This is real time. This is not fast forward. It's just called being in a hurry. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Okay. Alright, so now we're just going to reconnect the negative cable of the battery. Tighten that down with a 10mm socket.
Alright, once you're done installing the timing chain tensioner, you want to crank the crank pulley clockwise until you hear a couple clicks, and then you're all done.